mounted rockers. Bell housing is actually bolted over here. We don't use that system. We use this system, Quartermaster, and we made these little tabs for it, stainless steel tabs. And we pull that out, you can access one of the bell housing.
Hey guys, the long-awaited video about my V8 Pro car. A lot of you guys asked about this video, and I wanted to do it right. So I'm going to show you guys a little more in depth about how this car is built, which parts are on the car. And the philosophy behind this car.
So this car is designed to run a Chevrolet small block. We're going to put a different motor in it. This is the motor we ran in it before. We're going to be running a little bit bigger motor. It's basically the way this car came back from Iron Drift King, because all the events were cancelled after that. As you can see, Wisefab Feal Suspension. That's the lines for the electrical power steering that is situated right over here. Don't mind the hen, that's right over there. That's originally a Delphi system that we completely changed on the inside, so all the electric boards and stuff on the pump have been changed. Thinking about marketing that, but it's going to be a really expensive thing, so we're not doing that. There's extra reservoir that you can pull out, which is a lot easier to fill it as well. Fire extinguisher over there, battery box over there, which has the trickle charger. That's where we fill the quick change. So the quick change reservoir window comes out, quick change reservoir gets pulled out, and then it trickles back into the quick change. And over there we made a plate, so if I want to run rear mount radiator in this car, I can do that. That's a cage, everything is a cross, so there's a cross over there, and there's a cross in the mainstay, there's a cross for the door bars and all that stuff. So catch cans that we made with breathers left and right, exactly the same one. Yeah, this is basically the motor that's been in the car from the beginning. We made the D-port headers, of course. There's a little bit more about the headers later. Yes, it's an iron block, runs really cool, super happy with it. Valve covers had to be adjusted so we could run the HDK hood. It's a very simple car, it's very friendly to work on. Yeah, it's just that it needs lights and all that stuff, otherwise it would have been even more simple. I don't mind the air filter, we just put it on top there to keep dirt out of the carburetor. And this is basically a Dart small block, so it's everything that Dart ever made for a small block is right over here. So this car is running the HGK kit. The rear is completely cut off, as you can see. It's a tubular structure, chromoly, and the reason why it's made this way is that it can still absorb, so it's not going to be immediately damaging over here if you crash. And I wanted to have this bar over here in case somebody almost hits you, which happens a lot in drifting, like in transitions or something. Somebody miscalculates and they kind of flank you almost, so that the hit doesn't go on the wheel, but you still have this whole section to ascend into the wall. We also run springs over here so it can move a little bit more. FIA fuel cell, breather. Yeah, it's kind of simple. Made the firewall here. We spent a lot of time on making the firewall, and here you can see the whole fuel system is kind of recessed, so it doesn't get hit by debris. And over here we have a little shield over here for these bulkhead fittings. There's a whole discussion about running fuel lines in the interior of cars. Normally if you run a cage like this, we run FIA spec cages, which are very, very elaborate. I would say there is no safer place than inside one of these cages for the fuel line, so I'm running them inside. If there would be obviously legislation against it, we would change it. There you can see the fire extinguisher, which is plumbed into the system. Here we're taking the car apart, so there you can see it's a frame for the transmission. We're not using a cable. We're using a bell crank system that you can see over there, and there's one of the spares for the fire system there in the back. That orange cap, if you pull that out, you can access one of the bell housing bolts. This is a standard transmission tunnel, hasn't been changed on this car, so on the V8 bell housing can be difficult to reach the bolt, so that's behind that orange thing. Hanging wheel pedals, these are the tallest ones they make, so you have a lot of leverage. I like that a lot. Have them inside the car, away from all the heat and debris, and the driver can actually check what's up with them. All the gauges that we use are capillary gauges, or actual gauges as I like to call them, which means that they have a sensor that's always attached. And I really like that. I don't like these panels and all these displays and stuff. If you have an actual gauge, it also has way more sweep, so it moves from here all the way to there, which means that 20 degrees is quite a big move. It's yeah, it's about an inch movement on the gauge, so I like that a lot. And if you turn off the car, it will remain, the needle will remain on the temperature that you're at. Here we can adjust the brake balance of the car from front to rear, which obviously affects the bar over here. There you can see some of the lines, how we route them in this car. I like door bars that come out a little bit with a cross. I don't like a S bend, so this is coming out, has only one bend, and then it comes back in, which I think is way better than an S bend. Here I have the rev limiter, which I can set with a little screwdriver myself. And there are two motors that we run in this car. The one that's in the car right now is the Dart 350, and this one is called World Products Merlin. And World Products is a company that also makes the motors for the monster trucks, but those are big blocks. This one has AFR heads on it. It's not a Chevrolet casting. Chevrolet guys can see back here. There's no Chevrolet casting number. There's an extra port over here for if you want to run a dry sump or something like that. Obviously we run carburetors on these motors, Victor Jr. Low rise intake manifold, so we're leaving a little bit of horsepower on the table, but I also think it's important that the hood and all that stuff looks good. And this motor is about 610 crank horsepower. This motor will sit on 8,500 RPM all day long. That's also why it's a 400 cubic inch and not much bigger. If you go over 400 cubic inches, it really doesn't like sitting in RPM and with drifting. Although you run a quick change, you're always screwing around a little bit when you're chasing somebody. So I want to have a motor that's capable of running a little higher RPM, and that's exactly what this thing is doing. It's still wet sump. The small block does not have any trouble that the LS has with the oil starvation and stuff. It just doesn't happen with these things. Completely different design of oil pump, so you can just run these wet sump even with super high G applications. As an MSD Pro billet on both these motors, which is a billet, a digital distributor, and you can change the curve and everything from the ignition on this thing. Yeah, it works really well. It's super simple. Yeah, it's kind of a simple motor, and I think that's super important if you don't have a huge team. If you don't have Papadakis, those guys like that backing you, you can pull a lead off, put your finger in the lead and see if it has spark. You open the air filter and you check if there's fuel coming into the carburetors. It's all very, very simple, and if you want to run a lean operation, I think that's a very good idea. This is a motor we've been competing with in 2017, which is 350 Dart. Same ignition on there, same as a billet, MSD Pro billet. And we run here, you can see the linkage of the throttle. So it doesn't have a cable, it's 100% linkage, which is extremely nice. Custom valve covers because they didn't clear the hood, and here you can see one of those sensors. This is a capillary sensor, so there's gas in here that transports the temperature to the gauge, and you can't ever cut this or make it shorter or whatever. A lot of people don't use these anymore. It's kind of like old school, but I really like it because it's super accurate. It always works, so if you turn off your car after heat or something, or after qualifying or whatever, and you want to see how hot it is, you don't have to turn the car on at all. They don't use any electricity. There's no current whatsoever in them. So I really like that. Here you can see the flow of the Victor Jr. So it is a air gap intake, which means that there's air coming under here to cool down a little bit. Works really, really well. The thing with carburetors that a lot of people don't know is that if you're pushing an actual mixture into the intake, that's way heavier than just air. So if you would run a motor with injectors, the injectors would be here and there's just air coming in. With the carburetor, it's mixture coming in. The mixture is a lot heavier, so it pushes more into the intake. A little more detail on the motor. As you can see, this is a shaft mounted rockers, Jezel in this case. If you want to do high RPM with these things, definitely important to do the valve train upgrades over here. The dark motor we have doesn't have that setup. It has this reinforcement over here. Obviously, it also has good quality rockers and springs and valves and all that stuff. It's a Pro 1 head, as you can see over here. The transmission I run in this car is obviously not going to be a surprise. It's a G Force T101, a transmission that we sell ourselves. I really like the side shift one. It's a little more fab work to make it fit, as you guys have seen over here. But it's definitely a really reliable transmission. GM26 spline, the most used spline. Any manufacturer of clutches or whatever makes it in GM26 spline, and we use something that not everybody uses, which is a removable throwout bearing. So most guys will have a throwout bearing that's what I call a spider type, so it's bolted into the bell housing. It's actually bolted over here. We don't use that system. We use this system, Quartermaster, and we made these little tabs for it, stainless steel tabs. And the reason for that is that I want to be able to pull the hydraulic slave out of the car without removing the bell housing, because these bell houses are not the easiest to pull out of the car, especially if you have the standard transmission tunnel, which is not possible to do with the spider type ones. And you want to shim these things out, like this thing comes out and you shim it to the correct distance to the clutch. So this one, like, it's not easy because you need to take these things out, but you can totally bolt those out over here. And we've done that many times, and then you can kind of like wiggle this thing through, so you can leave the bell housing on the car and you can use that style of throwout bearing. Use a 7.25 inch clutch, which is definitely not for everybody. It's a super bitey clutch, but the motors that we use make a lot of RPM. I want a clutch that helps the motor reach at least 8,500 RPM, and these guys definitely do that. It's not a clutch you can street drive at all. It's very bad for street driving because it's like you need to engage it or not. But it really grips like hell. Like, it's definitely one of those things that give you the advantage on the lead, because you can really, no matter how much torque you have, it just grabs. It's just not very streetable. We have it in the FD car as well. It's another reason for me to run these clutches, and that's how the car works with it on deceleration. So if you let go of the throttle, the car is very snappy. Judges don't want to see you braking the whole time. So if you have a car that's dropping through the RPM really quickly, you can use it to your advantage in the chase. It's definitely not easy to do. A lot of guys will drift a lot better with a really big flywheel and a big clutch, because this setup does not have a really big flywheel. Actually does not have a flywheel at all. It's what you call a button clutch, and this is the button. So you use like a starter ring gear, like automatic. It doesn't have a flywheel. This is just a pressure plate. These things, like, this is totally normal. If they have like grooves and stuff, that's where you need to replace them. You can see all these little friction marks over here. This is such an extremely small clutch. This is a 7.25 inch clutch. I also ran a 5.5 inch clutch on this car, which just turns it into a motorcycle, but we could only do one event with it. We can do multiple events with these clutch plates. But what I really like is it really drops through the revs. It goes through the revs really fast, but it's doing labor, so it's moving the rear wheel. So if you're drifting, it's also obviously moving the weight of the drive shaft, of the all the internals of the transmission and the wheels itself, which is of course hundreds of pounds if you add it up. But if you let go of the throttle and you press the clutch, then obviously it drops down and revs really quickly. If you just let go of the throttle and don't press the clutch, it also decelerates really hard. I kind of like that. It also gives the motor a really racy sound. Like I said before, I can't stress enough, it's not for everybody. There's people that ask me, hey Wout, what clutch do you run in your car? I want to run the same one. If you do FD or something and you want to have a car that's really snappy on transitions, this is a great clutch to run. If you want to street your car or do like drift week or whatever, don't run this clutch at all. Definitely not a good idea to do that. And yeah, it's just one of those things that a lot of people forget, that it's important to keep in mind that the car also drives the way the motor behaves. It's not just your inputs on the steering wheel and your inputs on the handbrake or whatever, but drifting happens with your right foot, like you're driving with the throttle pedal, and the way the car responds to the throttle pedal is going to determine what the car looks like in drifting. And this definitely is a huge way away from how road cars drive. I really like cars that run this type of clutch. There's not a lot of guys that run them in FD or these kinds of things. Most guys have superchargers or big power adders and they run a more beefy clutch. Especially with the turbo car, you want to run a heavier flywheel assembly, a heavier clutch, and the reason for that is also that it gives the turbo more time to spool. I don't think I would run this on a turbo application, because you need to do a lot of clutch kicks on that, and you also want to have a little more mass so the car doesn't fly through the revs in the lower gears and the turbo doesn't get any time to spool. So yeah, that being said, if you have a really nasty NA motor, if it does a lot of RPM, you want it to have a light clutch and flywheel assembly anyways. James Dean runs 7.25 inch clutches, a couple other guys that run them, and yeah, it's definitely makes the car look really aggressive. Yeah, definitely one of the things, like for me, that's a big breaking point between a pro car and a streetable car, is running this kind of clutch. A little view of the engine bay of the car. Here you can see a couple of the things we've done. I've moved the assembly for the steering shaft. It's normally over here. I moved it over here so the headers can pass on the outside a little bit easier. These are the little removable cups that give you access to the bell housing bolts. Apart from that, it's all pretty simple. We run these Chromoly steering joints, obviously, to make everything a little bit more compact for the V8. All the brake stuff is all inboard, so it's just one line coming out over there, one line coming out over there, and that's just how it works. Yeah, apart from that, like here's the capillary sensors that I told you guys about. These two guys, that's basically your sensors right there. Gotta be careful with them, obviously. You don't want to damage that or whatever. Yeah, that's like the box that we made for the some ventilations on both sides. It also has a little tank over there that's for the overflow of the radiator, so it breathes into the overflow and then comes back out of it again. Yes, it's a pretty simple engine bay. There you can see we have a dry brake for the clutch, and there you can see the transmission temperature sensor and slip yoke for the drive shaft. Obviously, this is very, very convenient. You can just pull this loose and then you don't have to breathe the clutch again. At least that's the theory. This is a pretty old Wisefab kit. I think this is still the 2017 kit. Yeah, definitely works really well. Obviously super happy with the Feal Suspension. This case has the Swift springs on it. Really great suspension. It has some 6-pot brakes, which is more show than go. It's not really necessary on a drift car, but it's kind of cool to have. And as you guys can see, I kept the lines for the power steering pretty long, so you can pull the motor out next to it. Yeah, so that's a little look on the engine bay of this car. Switching the motors around obviously requires shimming the clutch out and checking all that stuff. In this case, it needed exactly the same shims as on the other motor, but of course that's not always a given because it's a different motor, it's a different crankshaft, so always check that clearance. Don't forget to take a look at our website as well, Einzel.nl. We ship worldwide, of course, Wisefab, Feal Suspension, our own brand Einzel, gearboxes, quick change differentials, axles, all kinds of things. A lot of fabrication components, of course, air jacks, subframes for quick change, you name it. Drop us an email and we'll hook you up. So as you guys can tell, I like this car a lot. This is something I may not build for a client, but it's definitely totally my philosophy of how a pro car should be, that's not ran by a huge team. This is a car that's so simple to run. You can run it with like 2 guys. No need for laptops or anything. We just pull the plugs and check them out. But the thing that's the major trick of this motor, people have been developing stuff for this motor for decades. Like, this motor was introduced in 1955, so you're on almost 70 years of experience on this motor. Yeah, we still gotta hook up that sensor over there. It's just lodged over there, so don't worry about that. But like, that's a major thing. So all the technology that's been developed for these motors has all been fine-tuned on drag strips and NASCAR, all that kind of stuff. So there's really no motor that's been developed as much as a Chevrolet small block. Since the beginning, there's over 100 million of these motors. So that's one for about 70% of the Americans. So that's crazy if you think about it. So it's the most used motor ever in the history of motors. And yeah, I just like that idea. It's the setup is really simple. I think the layout is really good. Also the center of gravity, which is a big thing for me. If you do geometry calculations on cars, for instance, anti-squat, anti-dive, roll center, a lot of that revolves around center of gravity. And a lot of people ask me, what about anti-squat and what can I do and this and that? But like, anti-squat, it's a percentage, and it's a percentage related to the center of gravity of the car. So the biggest favor you can do yourself in regards to anti-squat, anti-roll, roll geometry is to have a low center of gravity in the car. And I would rather have a heavier car with a lower center of gravity, and the motor plays, as you can see, this motor is so far backwards, and we still have room. Like, I could put this motor another inch further back, it would be more difficult to work on. So the packaging is really good. If you see this car with the hood on it, it's almost impossible to fathom that there's a motor behind it. If you see the distributor cap, like, that section is where the HVAC system would normally start. So the whole box over there, so the whole motor, including the cam cover, sits lower than the heating system of the E46, where the standard position of that is. So it's basically, I always say, like, it sits as low as a BMW motor where you took the cylinder head off. That's a little harsh, and I still love BMWs, obviously. My other car is BMW Turbo, love that as well. Obviously my drift week car. So I love my drift week car as well. Great concept. I love that BMW tilted the motors to the side, also for center of gravity, obviously. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's been a while, but I just wanted to show you guys what the car was like with the motor out, and show some stuff that's easier to see when you're working on the car. As you know, in Europe, we didn't have any drifting for 2 years. So that's obviously why I went to America. So this car was basically untouched for almost 2 years. It's sitting in my shop. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of people asked about this video, and I'm really curious to hear about what you guys think about this car, what you like, what you don't like. It's definitely one of those cars, like, every 5 years I try to build a crazy car. And if you see this car in real life, like all the little details and stuff, it's definitely one of those things. If I had to build it for a client, it would be crazy. But yeah, every 5 years I want to build something cool for myself. And we have the E36 lined up, which is going to be a way more simpler even than this, even less wires, and almost like a hot rod style with tugged wiring and stuff. It's going to be much more of a show car. Yeah, so I hope you guys like my car, and thanks for watching all the way to the video.